hell is a kind of perfection of evil.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, people that are evil in specific ways. I used to think it was sort of an exaggeration when Dante takes us and Virgil takes him on a tour of hell in his poem from the Middle Ages. I used to think it was kind of it's kind of like over the top, like, oh, this guy was gluttonous, so food will be dangled in front of him at all times, or he will be stuffed with food until he literally bursts. Okay, I get it. I understand that's bad. But part of the point there was that pet sins, following your emotions everywhere, whatever, so maybe you would just be like yanked between joy and despair incessantly. If you're a modern American who gets sent to hell, I don't know what your problem would be. You would be yanked between dopamine hits from social media and utter depression as you sit there in your bed after you blacken your phone and put it down, and now you're just like sad because you can't get the dopamine hit until you wake up again, or pick up your phone again because you don't sleep enough. Whatever the case may be, your evil will be perfected in hell. Yeah. And Lewis is very insightful on this because he's got, my favorite Lewis writing is his sermon, The Weight of Glory, which is about how you look at other people based on the fact that they are immortal souls meant to live forever, either in blessedness or in damnation, in heaven or in hell. And if you think about them that way, then you just look at people differently. You just look at your interactions differently. It's part of that kind of perspective change that I talked about a little bit earlier, is that you look at them as people actually in need of the eternal gospel, the everlasting gospel, because they're actually meant to live forever. And if they don't get that, then evil will simply find its full fruition. The flower of evil will grow until it blooms in hell. And you don't want that. You don't want to see those flowers.
Welcome back to On the Line. Today we sit down again with Adam Koontz. It's a wonderful interview. We talked to him in this episode, in comparison to last week, a little bit more in-depth about just kind of his view of where the church is at and what's happened over the last 100 years, but more importantly, how the church can react to that moving forward. So you'll hear a little bit about evangelization and just some different things going on within the church. As always, Adam Koontz offers great wisdom and insight for all of us. So we hope you enjoy this interview. And as always, if you can simply like this video, or if you're listening on one of the podcasts, if you can go on and just leave us a review, that very much helps this news, this information, this channel get out to more and more people. So we thank you for your support. Enjoy. All right, and Bennett says the tape recorder is rolling, so we're live.
Yeah.
Adam, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Welcome back.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah?
Yeah, for real. Yeah, like really good.
Last time was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. It was. I think we recorded too much tape, so some of that tape was actually recorded over later.
Yeah.
This is how these things go with tape. So.
Bennett's back there, and that's why he earns his money. Like, he's sweating by the end because he's just pulling out these
reels of tape.
Cassettes.
Yeah, right.
And then he's plugging new ones in.
Yeah.
He's got to fan it when it starts to overheat.
It's incredible what modern technology is like, and so Bennett was born like 200 years after tape.
Yeah.
But I was born before tape. So that's what I call it. It's fine. Yeah. It's good to be here. Yeah.
So, one thing I'm interested just off the bat.
Yeah.
So you've been all over the place.
Yes, sir.
We recorded you, what was it, back in October? So, and you were bouncing around then. And, so what kind of thing, what do you do to kind of keep yourself level, to keep your energy levels up?
Yeah.
When you're bouncing around, you've got a lot of different things going on. Like, do you have any kind of tips and tricks?
Energy levels, God gave me a lot of energy.
Mm-hmm.
So, as long as I am alone long enough, then I can talk to anybody for any length of time. If I just have to talk to people incessantly, then a great wave of sadness and boredom simultaneously washes over me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to myself, what is all of this even for?
Mm-hmm.
If I can be alone, then I can wake up the next morning and talk for 20 minutes to the guy serving me eggs at the hotel, which is what I do.
Yeah.
So,
you need your time. Like,
yeah.
You can go do your thing, but then you just need your alone time.
I don't believe in Jungian psychology, so I don't believe in introvert, extrovert. I just believe in sometimes you have to talk to people and sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
Okay. But I have to be because otherwise you don't really have a soul.
Mm.
There's nothing inside there, right? And unless you're just glad handing for some purpose, you don't always need to talk to people. You need time to think. I think we talked about this last thing. You need time to reflect, time to think,
Hmm.
time to have a thought about what is going on. And if I don't have that time, then I have no energy whatsoever.
Well, I notice your thoughts become, not your thoughts, but at least my thoughts become more incoherent if I don't have that time. Because
Yeah.
you're just talking and
Right.
you're processing. But then, like, even if you just go for a walk,
Mhm.
or for me, like some gym time in the morning or
Yeah.
something like that, and all of a sudden, like, your mind just, it moves to a different level, and it
Right.
just starts, like, it starts pulling all of this stuff together and creating like a narrative, right, and a story that makes all this different
Yeah.
conversations, maybe things you've read or watched, and it makes it coherent, and then you start to actually come up with like a thesis, and you get kind of a systematic structure in your thoughts, and then you're kind of good to go.
I find that I lie to myself less when I am alone.
Hmm.
So self-deception, I think, is one of the chief problems most people have. I mean, some people deceive themselves that they are worse than they are. Probably more people deceive themselves that they are better than they are. And I don't just mean morally. I mean at their job, at being parents, whatever it is that they're doing, right? I lie to myself less when I'm alone, because there's no possibility that when you're alone you can draw the kind of immediate comparisons between yourself and someone else engaged in the same thing.
Hmm.
Okay. So, for example, like something I do all the time, preaching, if I'm thinking about my own preaching on its own terms, then I'm going to be like, you could have done this better. You could have done that better. Why didn't you draw that out? Why did you rush that? Whatever. If I think about, I'm sitting there and some guy is like reading a sermon in an awkward quasi monotone, then it's like, I, what is this guy doing? you know, which is fine, but like not actually good. I think you notice this with anybody's routine who actually gets better at things over time,
Hmm.
is that it has nothing to do with comparing yourself to other people.
Hmm.
It has everything to do with comparing yourself to where you want to be or where you want to go or what you want to do with it.
Hmm.
And so I find myself to be, it's a little ironic. If I'm alone, I'm a less selfish person for the next time I'm actually with somebody else.
Hmm.
And he's reading a sermon in a quasi monotone. And I'm like, oh, that was a good point.
Hmm.
You're actually more appreciative of other people if you have a little bit of a break from them.
Yeah.
If there's incessant comparison and presence, everything becomes tiresome.
Mm.
Yeah.
One thing we try to do, so I don't travel nearly as much as you.
Sure.
You have traveled, right?
Yeah,
But
right.
Ethiopia, gone for 9 days, couple podcast trips,
Right.
pastors conference, a handful of things throughout the year.
Yeah.
And early on in our marriage, we would do that thing where we would just kind of like text
Yeah.
a lot while I was gone,
Right.
and then maybe one or two phone calls or
Yeah.
something, and then eventually we had the conversation. Like, I think whenever we're separated, right? Because
Mhm.
I'm gone or you're gone or
Mhm.
whatever. Like, if you're gone, you just need to be present there. When I'm gone, I need to be present there, and then we'll come back and we'll appreciate each other more.
Mhm.
And I find it so much more fulfilling just to even just take a step away. I mean, not that I want to be away from my wife or
Yeah.
anything like that, but if I
Yeah.
have to be, just kind of not like texting throughout the day, but just being in our own worlds. When we come back together,
Yeah.
we have a greater appreciation. Because to your point, you might look and you're like, man, I'm taking a lot of things for granted. Or you might say, oh, I've been harsh on this area, right?
Mhm.
But you're able to reflect in that way because now you've got your own space and you can kind of reflect on something you're separated from.
Yeah. I think the presence absence difference is really because you are always present to yourself, but when you are with other people incessantly or with one other person specifically, a total lack of absence, a total lack of silence or distance, makes it impossible to see what is actually occurring.
Mm.
Whereas if I can step back for any length of time, even if that's that I take a walk,
Mm.
then I have the ability to think about what's going on in a way that in the midst of it, I don't.
Hmm.
And particularly with groups of people. So the last time I was here, I had just come from your pastor's conference,
Hmm.
is that you're with all these people you don't really know, or or in the church, you often sort of know a variety of people,
Hmm.
but not really, is that your energy level is going to get sucked way down if and when you can't step away, even when you're in the midst of them, from seeing the environment completely horizontally. You need, if not like you can't get a vertical perspective because you're not God, but you can go up at some kind of angle from what is going on here and be like, this is not a big deal. It doesn't matter. So like when people give me weird questions or difficult questions, or just obviously challenging questions in such an environment, for example, it never bothers me because I'm never thinking about the guy completely horizontally. Like, oh, this is completely personal. He's trying to ruin your life right now. Please respond accordingly. You know, like it's kind of like, whatever. I don't know exactly what his motivation is or where he's coming from, but I'm just going to answer the question like I'm stupid and I don't know any of that, or I haven't thought of any of it. And I'll just answer it on its own terms if I can, and try not to be a jerk about it. But, you know, the perspective is I'm not looking at the interaction in the same way that things that I think are ultimately valuable. There are totally face-to-face moments, right? I would say in my life, those are basically my family and the Lord. That's really it. Everything else has some kind of, I don't mean an angle like a kind of like an in or a way or a scheme. I mean an angle like I'm going to depart somewhat from the totally horizontal, because this doesn't have ultimate face-to-face value, this interaction, right? If I go up at a certain angle from this interaction and think, this guy is just saying this because he's required by virtue of where his congregation is to be kind of hostile to me, that's fine. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
He heard something completely different in seminary and hasn't thought about this topic since then. That's fine. It's okay. You know, we all have limited perspectives on things. So I try to keep that in mind and see this person not totally horizontally, because also I think what really sucks energy out of you is trying to give yourself to people in the same way and to the same degree that you can dedicate yourself to the Lord's purposes. They're gonna disappoint you. And if that person doesn't have the lasting nature of the relationship that family does, then it's okay. You don't have to be upset or even dismayed when someone disappoints you, because what else could possibly happen here? You need to have a perspective where you realize that this person is just as limited as you are. But if you never step away from that, you don't have that perspective on other people because you don't have that perspective on yourself. So you can't possibly see someone else in that way because you can't see yourself in that way.
Yeah. What are there any like really wild questions you've gotten?
Usually,
like ones that just blindside you and you're like, what?
The stuff that really blindsides me is kind of a guy who's sort of in his own world and, you know, arises from his MacBook or something, you know, and has paid attention for the last 5 minutes, and we're like 3 hours deep into a 7-hour thing, you know, and he's like, but what about this? And I'm like, I have no idea, actually. Otherwise, usually you have a sense based on the knowledge of the group or maybe even the knowledge of the guy.
Yeah.
This is where he's coming from. Here's what he's really talking about. If you answer it straightforwardly, he won't understand what you're saying. Or if you do, that's the only way he possibly can.
That's one of the fun things, isn't it? So like we had a pastor's conference recently, right?
Yeah.
And this isn't a put down. This is, I think, what's interesting. But you'll have like someone present, but then you watch the questions come in.
Yeah.
And it's just a great experiment on understanding kind of just the different way people's minds work.
Yeah.
Right. Because you look at a question, and to your point, I mean, one thing you could do is you could just kind of like, well, I think that's a dumb question. But the better way is to just look and say, like, what's this person processing?
Right.
Right. And you kind of look and you're like, oh, that's what he's and it's so interesting to watch the different perspectives that people are coming with and the conclusions and the things they're wrestling with. And it is quite complex. And the only way you're going to properly engage that is to, as you said, kind of just don't start off with Like, are you coming at me, or is that like an offensive
Right.
one? But just kind of saying, what's this person wrestling with? And that's really fascinating. And let's take a minute and dive into this
Right.
guy's world and kind of figure out where
That's
he's
right.
coming from.
Yeah, because very few people listen in a full way.
Mm,
And the number of times that any given person does that are probably limited, and they have nothing to do with conferences or continuing education or an academic setting or a professional setting. They generally have to do with family, and especially family crises.
mm,
And that's when the person just completely opens up. That's why I think very often people remember particularly things that were said at birth, in sickness, and at death.
hmm
It imprints itself on them, because that's when they're actually completely receptive in a way that if you're teaching something or explaining something, you would hope all of your students would be, but the fact is they're just not,
hmm
right? The guy that's on his computer for the first 2 hours and 55 minutes, of something that's going to last 7 hours, he's just another version of what all the guys who are actually just listening at that moment are doing, which is, and people are probably listening to this in the background of something, right?
hmm
Point proven, is they're listening in a way that is very partial, both senses of the word. They're kind of listening, but also they're listening with a certain slant
hmm
on what they're hearing and your presentation style and stuff like that. That's the way it goes.
hmm
So that's why the questions always come in from a partial place. So in my line of work, it's like, okay, here's the guy who at this pastor's conference where most guys are dressed like we are today, he's wearing a collar and a black jacket.
hmm
And his question is about the liturgy. Shock, right? And here's a guy wearing a golf shirt with his church's name on it. And his question is about missions and evangelism.
Yeah.
Shock, And so it's
It's
fine.
nice when things make sense.
Yeah, it's nice when things make sense. And sometimes they don't.
They don't.
But very, very rarely where you get an elderly gentleman in a golf shirt asking you about the introit for Rogate Sunday.
Yeah.
Just not how it goes. And so people are partial, and that's just the way, that's just the way life is. Because I think the amount of people who are listening, who can just sit there and listen, the capacity to listen is relatively rare. To listen in a full way, the way almost everybody does at really critical points in their lives,
hmm
right? Most of us have a much narrower way that we go through life,
hmm
and that's how we get through life, and it's just the way we're built. But
hmm
people who can, if you get somebody who can just listen and take it in and then reflect on it, that's quite a gift
hmm
in any relationship. Let alone if you get that. If you get that in a student, that's absolute. That's gold.
Yeah.
You don't even actually have to teach that person. You just have to talk to them a little bit.
Yeah. And they'll internalize it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Well, let's dive into evangelism.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm intrigued. This is what you wanted to talk about.
Always.
Right. Always.
Always.
So if we're going to understand, so is this evangelism? So like last time, I think you kind of introduced this well before when we were talking, right?
Yeah.
Last time you were here, we talked about secularism and the martyrs,
Right.
with kind of the main thrust being secularism and what has been kind of this movement that's taken place in the last 100 years that's
Right.
affected us. And then, am I right that evangelism is kind of a good way of looking at the church's response to that, the church's engagement to that? Is that
Yeah.
a good
Because
explanation?
if you look at these as two different, as opposed armies,
hmm
you've got the army of the Prince of Darkness. You've got Satan. And he's been working very, very, very strongly and fervently with incredible levels of energy, right, to attack the kingdom of God, the reign of the word of God among, like we talked about last time, essentially our neighbors,
Mhm.
particularly because secularization is most progressed in the West, even though it's a process that seemingly every modern or modernizing society anywhere in the world undergoes. So he's been working overtime. What has been going on with us, and that this is my great concern, and this is the reason that I talk about this all the time, is because I think a lot of our discussion of secularization, of the decline of the American church, particularly, or you could say even more rapidly if you say North American and you include Canada,
Hmm.
that when you think about it, we have been in retreat. We're like the Union Army throughout almost everything up to the Battle of Antietam. So we go on basically a year and a half in Civil War terms. We'd have to say we've been in retreat for at least 100 years in all sorts of ways that we've been on retreat. So if I conceive of that not as two armies opposed, and then we talk, as I hope we will today, about what the army of the Lord takes up, what the Christian soldiers who are going onward, what actually they're supposed to be doing. If we think of it as just sort of a sociological phenomenon, like there are more registered Democrats than Republicans in this county for the first time, or something like that, then it's hard to really conceive of it the right way, because you're constantly thinking in terms of I'm declining. So what do I do to arrest decline or even reverse decline? And I think maybe what I need to do is I need to go back to a certain kind of a past. And I think you see in lots of people, particularly in the kinds of churches to which the youngest people who can drive themselves to church go to, which are generally very traditional churches in modern America, is a certain kind of a nostalgia, which I'm not opposed to. It's like partial attention. Whining about it would be silly, but I do observe that it's a nostalgia. I want to go back to maybe a past I never imagined, but certainly a time when things were going better for the church. Okay. Or I want to hold on to that, right? Why are people so averse to people who get new countertops every 5 years? Don't want to change anything in the church. Like they want to keep the carpet from 1978. Why is this? It's partly because church is a place that uniquely, whether your carpet is from 1978 or, you have some Gothic edifice built in, 1858, church is a place where things don't change so much like they do in modern life. And I think what that creates in people is a desire for return or retreat. And particularly in conservative churches like the Missouri Synod, this is generally how we justify things. All of us.
So is that overall a good thing, bad thing, or just something to observe?
I think it's just something. It's the weather. It's just
okay.
It's just is that people who are conservatively oriented, I would say on a personal level, I'm not even talking about specific political positions, specific church political positions. They're people who are oriented toward the past in some way, maybe in many ways, is that the way that they're going to justify what they're doing is by going back to the past. And if someone doesn't have any of that, but is beginning to find it in the church, he is also engaging in it's a different nostalgia. The Brazilians have a word for this. We don't have it, saudade, but it's like a nostalgia for something they never experienced, which is not usually how we use the word nostalgia, but it does capture certain things about traditional Christian churches for people that were raised outside of them or in a non-traditional Christian church, whether non-denom, liberal, Protestant, whatever. They come in and they're nostalgic for something that they've never actually before seen.
So we had John Davidson on recently. So he's a Catholic, but he was kind of interested in some of this. But one of the things he was speaking about was particularly in the Catholic Church. He goes to, and I forget there's a formal name for it, but it's a group of Catholic churches. So originally was it Vatican II, right? So the Latin Mass was changed over. And then there was kind of a group that said we're going to stick with the Latin Mass.
Right.
And then at first they were kind of removed from the Catholic Church to some degree. But then they were brought back under Benedict. So now there's this group that's in full fellowship with the Catholic Church. But for the most part, they do a Latin Mass or a form of the Latin Mass. And he was talking about these communities and just some of the statistics and he's part of one of these communities, that is exploding with millennials in particular, right? A little bit of Gen X as well. But the younger people are flocking to that. So if you were to look at like the overall Catholic numbers in the U.S., it wouldn't be overly optimistic, although there's some things that look kind of good. But if you were to zoom into those are exploding in a way that nothing's exploded in the Catholic Church in the last 100 years. So is that part of what you're talking about? Is just this desire for something? Because no millennial has ever experienced normally, like they weren't like 8 years old going to some kind of ceremony where there was another language spoken for an hour. There was, all of the things going on. So it's, to your point with nostalgia, it's not like they're like, when I was 8 years old, I did this. Now I'm 29 and I really miss that.
And
they're saying this is something I've never experienced,
Right.
but there's this beauty of the otherness.
And they want something for their kids that their parents probably had and didn't give them. And their grandparents definitely had. In the case of the Catholic Church, they want a cohesive neighborhood with a parochial school and a Latin mass. You used to be able to get that anywhere. Unless you lived in rural Alabama and you were Roman Catholic, you could get that anywhere. Now you have to go seek it out, or you have to you have to find the poster that tells you from a blog you're reading, on New Liturgical Movement, which I think is so old. It's a Blogspot blog. Here's where the Catholic masses are in Rhode Island, in Nebraska, in Northern California, whatever. You're seeking out something that used to be normal. And I think that's true for a lot of people.
I think it's true in the LCMS too.
I think that's true for everybody.
For everybody, yeah.
For everybody. If you're showing up to church on a regular basis at this point, you are probably seeking out something that used to be normal and no longer is. You might be getting it. You might not be getting it where it is that you go to church, but that's what you're looking for. You're not coming for a lot of things in the American church, particularly the Protestant American church, are designed to appeal to a public that doesn't exist anymore. Like some sort of disengaged, but otherwise somewhat interested, somewhat Christian person who's out there. I think church people have trouble understanding how secularized America has become, especially in lower age demographics. So the lower down you go, not only are you dealing with all different kinds of people from all over the world, but you're also dealing with those people, no matter where they originated, are so much less likely to go to church than somebody who's 63 years old. I think it's hard for us to understand from inside the church how unchurched America is at this point. And so therefore we don't really know like what we're dealing with. So if we're fighting the powers of the Prince of Darkness, right, then we don't actually know like how many forces he has, because we don't know how people are even living their lives. If someone therefore comes out of that by God's grace, he's coming into something. He's not saying like, oh, I'm really undecided between Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod. He doesn't know what any of this is. And it doesn't mean that is nothing. But I think we have to have some perspective on its relative importance to the majority of our population, essentially anywhere in the United States, who doesn't go to church.
So how does that equal then kind of roadmaps forward a little bit, right? So, for instance, is a good road forward to move back to and kind of lean into that nostalgia?
Yeah.
Or are there going to be issues there? Or do we also have to maybe understand, as you're talking about, like the vocabulary, like, we're very used to, I think, in the Lutheran Church, thinking, especially like as pastors, right, that this LCMS, these little divides
big deal.
mean so much. Or
That's
like sola, right? Like, yes, I'm not saying sola is wrong theologically, but I'm saying like if you like wear a shirt like sola fide or something like that, or sola scriptura, like there's no 32-year-old like walking down the street that's like, that's what I've been looking for. Like, you're telling me that that's what the Lutheran Church does? Like, I've been looking for this. Like, they don't have a concept or a matrix by which to even understand what that means.
So I mean, to take it in a sequence that I think is helpful is to say that you have to understand what are the basic things that we're actually offering to people. Okay. We're not offering completely different social context at this point. Rick Warren starts this church in Southern California and begins to offer mountain biking groups and all this kind of thing. And now he's doing women's ordination. So he's just doing it all, right? But that's of a piece with how he started that church, Saddleback Church, which is people are kind of disengaged. So if we can get them engaged in some kind of activity and then have very low level discussion in the whole scheme of things, which in the people of God, that equals a low level of maturity. People of God don't know the word of God. Maturity level is low. So of course you're going to end up ordaining women because the society around you says a girl can do anything a man can do and she can do it better. and you don't know the Word of God, so you don't know why men and women are different, or how they're different, or why that assigns different roles to them. You don't know any of that. He designs all this to appeal to as many people as possible, and then he gets imitated by thousands. I mean, he matters a lot more for American Christian history in the past 30 years than anything that's ever happened in Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Again, I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's bad. In fact, it's probably quite bad, but I'm saying it like it's the weather.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm just trying to, I report, you decide,
Yeah.
So all of that is set up to be more, right? So if you go to a restaurant and you get a menu that's like 20 pages, I'm exaggerating, but you could get something that's 10 pages. You're just like, I don't even know what to do, and if your wife already had trouble figuring out what she wanted to eat for dinner, which she probably did, now she gets a 10-page menu. Like, this is no good. Like, it's
going to be a bad date.
It's bad, And so I think the church needs to understand, what are the basic things that what do we do, basically? If somebody says, I install windows for people, I farm, what does a church do? Well, a church proclaims the Word of God. To me, that's the most basic way to think about it. Church proclaims the Word of God. Everything else is more or less helpful bells and whistles. But that's what the church does. So, for instance, I think education, which you have a school, I have a school, education, which is something that the Lutheran Church used to be extremely invested in, to the degree that almost every congregation had a school. Certainly a majority had a school at one point. And we said, your kids need to go here. They need to go here. What was the idea behind that? Well, it wasn't just that the Lutheran Church was interested in pedagogy or the theory, do we do phonics or how do we teach? That's all interesting. The basic idea was the child's biggest need as a human being is to know the Word of God. And lo and behold, and I've even been to churches. I went to this church. They're starting a school. Never had a school before. They're starting a school. And I think partly I was there because they need more support for this school, both moral support and financial support. Well, in this church, it has no school, or it hasn't had a school until, a few years back. All the people in this Bible class, maybe about 120 people in Bible class, the vast majority of them had gone to a Lutheran school. Well, yeah, because you heard for your whole life, functionally, here's what the Word of God is, and this is why it's important, and you need to repent and believe in the gospel and walk in the Lord's ways. Just basic CFW Walther. What is the basic counsels of salvation? Okay, he says that has to be in every sermon. Those 3 steps. Okay, every sermon. Now you know, but that all needs to be in there. They heard this over and over and over. Well, guess what? Now they believe it. Yeah. So that's an example where I think we invested well in something that pays enormous dividends on what we do, basically. Lots of other things are not what we do, basically. And I'm not just talking about offering mountain biking programs, it's like there's a lot of stuff that, if you boil it down, is essentially a distraction. And one way to know what that is to find out from your people lifelong, they went to Lutheran school or they just showed up, 2 months ago. What are you here for? And there's going to be a wide variety of answers. It's a church. It's people. There's going to be but the basic thing is going to be about their understanding of who God is in Christ Jesus, as they have learned it from the proclamation of the Word of God. The rest of it is kind of like, could be good, could be bad, but like, it's not our basic activity.
If you had to take a guess, what do you think? Would you say it's 50-50? Would you say the majority of churches, it's a minority? How many of those churches do you think spend the majority of their time focused on and brainstorming and thinking about some brand new idea and new way to reach the community that's almost like never been thought of? Something like a mountain biking, right? Or something that would be very external to the core purpose of the church, as you're saying. But all their efforts go into these external things.
Yeah.
And therefore, they would never say, like, we don't care about the internal thing.
No, they would.
But it just gets left out. Where's that at on the spectrum?
I think distraction is probably, one of Satan's chief tools is to distract. And he never clearly states what his purposes are. This is why people don't trust politicians, but it should be the reason, even more than that they shouldn't trust Satan when he tempts, because he likes to say, this is what I know that you want, and here's what I want you to do. So I'm going to present what I want you to do in a way that looks like what you want. And it won't be, or it will be for a certain fleeting time. But if he does that, then okay, now he's got you in his power. And it would seem that the church generally is very distracted. I think the best example of this in Scripture is the church in Jerusalem. The church in Jerusalem is largely composed of, if not entirely composed of Jews. Maybe there are some Gentile converts. So they have an ethnic hang-up about non-Jews, that is, Gentiles coming into the church in a broad way, as the word of God is spreading out from Jerusalem, beginning from Jerusalem. Jesus says beginning, but not the be-all and end-all, beginning from Jerusalem. The word of God now goes out in Acts, and if you just make the book of Acts in terms of like a set of maps, and we talked about this with this pastor's conference I was at, if you just do it in terms of a set of maps, your maps would always be bigger, 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 bigger. So it wouldn't be like, here's a big map and here's a little inset. It would be like you start with the inset, and then you get a regional map, and now you get like a multinational map, and now you've got an imperial map, and then depending on what you believe happened with the 12 apostles, you've got a global map, because St. Thomas is all the way over in India, reportedly. And, I personally believe St. Andrew died in Scotland like he was supposed to, right? Or maybe Russia. Maybe it was Russia.
I love it. Can I tell you one of my theories? So I think there's at least a chance that Paul was not beheaded in Rome.
Yeah.
But that he was released.
Definitely.
And then he went, I think, further west. And then he went north. And I think he ended up in Germany. And I think he got married, settled down, had some kids. And I think I might be his great grandchild.
That I've never heard that theory, but I'm willing to entertain anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a global story, and that's the story of the advance of the gospel. Jerusalem church is this weird little interlude where in the middle of the book of Acts, chapter 15, now we all got to go back to Jerusalem for a meeting. And the meeting is important to church unity. And I think that's not nothing, but it's not the main movement of the church, which is outward. It is the church making sure that it's all on the same page. But the being all on the same page is about the mission. It's not being on the same page to placate Jerusalem. Jerusalem also needs to be, and this is what James does in his speech, and the human dynamics of that chapter are really interesting. Who gets to talk in what order? James speaks last. They have to be corrected by the word of God too. But notably, they don't, therefore, unlike, say, Antioch, send out missionaries. They're just kind of like, what you guys are doing is fine according to the scriptures. We have now recalled this. And that is fine, but it is in the whole scheme of what is supposed to be happening, a detour or a distraction, or at best a piece of confusion. And a lot of what happens in the church, therefore, I see as Jerusalem type of stuff. That we are extremely interested in our own prerogatives or in our own things to which we are accustomed. In the case of them, it was Jews being the people of God, ethnic Jews almost exclusively. And if you are not already, you need to become an ethnic Jew in order to be among God's people. And their vision, therefore, is narrowed, right? Their attention is partial. Their vision is narrowed because it's not really corrected by the word of God until these climactic moments in the book of Acts.
So how does that play out today? How do you see that playing out in the church structure today? You see us doing similar things, and if so, like what would be some concrete examples of the way this plays
Yeah.
out?
On a congregational level, the most concrete example is just a sense that of which God's people are sometimes aware and sometimes they're not,
Hmm.
that they don't know how to have meaningful contact with the outside world. So if I were selling windows, like in the earlier example,
Hmm.
this would be like, I can't make the case to anyone why you need windows or
Yeah.
why you need new windows. Now, that seems silly to everyone listening because it's obvious. Okay. So the idea that we're not sure how to explain what we're doing to other people who are not into it right now is a major problem. Sometimes that hardens into complete disinterest
Hmm.
in proclamation. And I guess the reason I chose the word proclamation is because it's a word Peter uses that covers what the whole church is doing. Proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. So it's not only what the public ministry carries out, it's also what the people of God do with their children, for example, right?
Hmm.
So this covers is what we are doing have much, if anything, to do with the proclamation of the word of God. Yes, we've been focusing on family devotions, and so we're doing family. So now our families have the word of God more richly in their homes. Yes, we're focusing on a school, so our children are now being educated in the whole context of the word of God, informing everything. Yes, the pastor is trying to get better at preaching,
Hmm. Yeah.
right? Whatever. But what often happens then instead is that we're not even aware that we need to improve at these things. We're not even
Hmm.
aware that, for instance, we should proclaim the word of God to other people.
Hmm.
We are simply making it an issue of church life as it's currently constituted, and how do we just kind of arrange that better. So
Hmm.
you're not asking where the ship is going. You're just saying who gets to sit where, in the stateroom at dinner.
Yeah.
And maybe that's interesting to some people.
Yeah. Well, I was talking about this. I'm going to be careful not to give details away,
Yeah.
but I was talking about this with another pastor, and it was a situation at a church. Doesn't have a lot of money. They're still afloat,
Sure.
and they came up with this idea to kind of fundraise, and it was something that would probably help one or two people in the church
Yeah.
that had kind of a particular need,
Yeah.
and maybe three people total in the broad community.
Yeah.
And those three people are not interested in the church now. I don't think it would change that, right?
Yeah.
And we were just reflecting on, like, that was the idea they came up with,
Yeah.
but there was no like thought, there was no process of like, okay, if someone gave us a $200,000 check, what would we do for the health and longevity of the proclamation of the gospel in this community?
Yeah.
Right. There was no thought of that. And I don't mean like, well, let's create like a bike, a bike ramp or
Yeah,
something
right,
like that.
yeah.
But there was no even thought process of that. They just kind of came up with this like kind of very particular idea to fix like one little small problem they recognized. And the conversation was very quick in that. And then it was done.
Yeah.
And then like it kind of set off. And it was, to your point, there was no just kind of, I don't know, thoughtfulness or energy
Yeah.
or an engagement of like, what if we had $200,000? Like, what would we be excited to do anything? Or maybe we wouldn't be excited to do anything, which is a good pulse on just where they're at.
Yeah. And a lot of our congregations, particularly because of our structure, right? So this is different in the Roman Catholic Church because they have a centralized structure that works more like a corporation, where they close, the Krispy Kreme that is not selling a lot of donuts.
Mm-hmm.
They close two of those, and they send the remnant staff and resources to the one that's doing great.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We don't work like that. The Krispy Kreme franchise is your own, and you may not even actually sell many donuts, depending on what you're doing. And that's fine. We're not going to take your franchise away from you, but you rise or fall on your own.
Yeah.
Right. After your franchise training, you can basically do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's how we operate. So we have a lot of places that if they thought about $200,000, they're thinking concretely in terms of can we pay a pastor,
Mm-hmm.
or can we fix our building, or whatever, right? We think in survival mode, partly because of how we're constituted, partly because of distraction, but partly also because how we are set up is set up to maximize the autonomy of an individual Christian congregation.
Mm-hmm.
There are historical reasons for that. We can talk about them. We cannot talk about them. I don't really care. There are historical reasons for that. What that functionally results in modern America is that everyone rises or falls on his own.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And because of that, not only are we often in competition with each other, okay, in a place like Minnesota, in a place like Missouri, in a place like Indiana, we compete with each other, let alone Satan, who's our actual competitor. We compete with each other, but we also are always just, more or less like how close are we to death? If we get a pastor, 600 some vacancies as we record this, right? Let's say 200 of them are non-viable. We still have 400 viable vacancies in a church with 5,800 congregations. Okay. I'm a pastor, so I don't do math, but you can figure out the percentage. But, we're wondering if we can just be here, So, of course, when you're in a mode like that, imagine if you go to work every day, like, will I have a job? That affects everything that you do.
So is this a sustainable system moving forward?
I don't personally think so. It is the one to which our denomination is attached. So I don't think it's going to change.
Yeah.
I don't personally think so, simply because it doesn't really take account of the fact that we're supposed to be playing for the same team in a very difficult environment. It was designed for a totally different environment, right? So 19th century America, nobody's going to close down a church for any kind of legal reason like we had during COVID. I'm not even talking about your virological opinions. I'm talking about the precedent of the government under certain circumstances being able to say the church is closed indefinitely, right? And churches in other countries went through even more of that than we did in the United States. But just the hostility of an environment where 19th century America, 9 out of 10 people were raised as what would now be thought of as an evangelical or fundamentalist Protestant. That's America, That doesn't mean that they're church members.
Yeah.
In 1847, when the Missouri Synods formed. It means that the general operating conditions of church are extremely favorable to a church if you want to make a run of it.
So does that mean, so in that situation, let's say you're whatever, Minnesota South, right, at this point, you might have 200 congregations, and you may be planting 15 a year, something like that. And therefore the idea is, those churches, which are going to be financially viable, like of course they are, right? They're going to be growing at whatever percentage, whatever, they can make their own decisions,
right?
And that's kind of fine. But now we're in a situation where you're like, okay, well here's 4 churches, and they're all on a trajectory to all be gone within 15 years,
easily,
and none of them can really afford a pastor. Right. And none of them want to work together to like change their Sunday schedule so that you could even hypothetically get a pastor to like do a quad parish or something.
Yeah.
And therefore everyone on the outside's looking and they're going, well, that's going to crash and burn.
Yeah.
There's viable options to fix it. One would be maybe sell 3 buildings, get a church. Everyone can drive 12 minutes because everyone drives 25 minutes to Walmart.
Right.
And then you might be able to salvage this thing. You'd certainly be able to afford a pastor. Right. And then you could actually kind of do some things for this proclamation of the gospel. So everyone on the outside is looking at that. But the internal people are not, and it's not even, I'm not even trying to like yell at them. But to your point, they're just going about their business. Their grandma, whatever, raised them in this church.
Right.
And they're just concerned about like who's going to wash the carpets on, next Sunday or something like. They're not thinking about this broad picture.
No.
But we don't have a structure where someone can come in and say, here's how you fix this. This is objectively wise. Let's hash out the details.
Yeah.
But this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, you could do this. If you do have somebody like that, it's very unusual. It's extremely unusual to find in our official structure. It's maybe a little more common to bring in some sort of consultant of some kind. But all of that, I think the key to this is all of that is voluntary. So I'm saying the system is not optimized for functioning in a very difficult environment. It's optimized, like you said, for a situation where, well, what does the pastor's health care cost in 1850? Well, It costs whatever paying the doctor to set his son's broken leg costs. That's what it costs. There's no monthly payment. There's no, you know, you don't have to have this giant amount of insurance on your roof. Okay. That's just, life just costs less. In addition to which, people are not, the hostility that you're going to encounter, and this is kind of important in Missouri Synod history, especially with its schools, is linguistic hostility, or it's hostility to the immigrant population that the Missouri Synod largely, if not entirely, was. It's not hostility to the gospel. If you have hostility to the gospel, you're dealing in a much more difficult environment. And just in the farming terms that the gospels often use, you're dealing with much poorer soil conditions. That's just the way it is. It's okay, you know. If, however, that still relies on those 4 congregations, they're not going to share that guy for long. He's going to take a call somewhere else. It's not so much stupid work and frustration and 3 to 4 council meetings. You know, he's not going to do that for long. That's just people. It's realistic. All of that is voluntary. Whereas the picture that I painted of a franchise, you know, nothing like the Missouri Synod would ever be a franchise because it wouldn't hold together.
Yep.
They would just say to this one and this one over here, you're done in 3 months, and we're all moving to the central location, and we're actually going to be able to make money there. So if you have a basic business of the proclamation of the Word of God, that's the church's business. I want to say Pfotenhauer, who was a Minnesota guy,
Still is, yeah.
Yeah, the name is still around, right? The guy that was the Missouri Synod president, Friedrich Pfotenhauer. So he was like a missionary back when in Minnesota and the Dakotas. And I think he has a sermon or something like that called The Church's Business. And I want to say it's from the 1920s when business is booming in America. And he says the church's business is the proclamation of the Word of God. If you think about it that way, it really does clarify things. Like, how much is the Word of God going forth into and, you know, deeply into the members of this congregation, and then how much is it going out from the members of this congregation? It's, you know, it's not, you know, it's not. I'm not saying let's do sabermetrics for church. You can't measure all of that, but you can have a general sense from, wow, our meetings are always about cleaning the carpets.
Yeah.
Our meetings are always about survival mode. And not just our congregational meetings, but our circuit meetings, our district meetings, our synod meetings, you know, it's all essentially like cleaning the carpets.
Yeah.
That's when you know you have a distraction problem. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. I'm just interested in this. So let's just play hypothetically. New church, right? So
yeah,
you just received a call out to Pittsburgh,
yes,
right? Which is, but let's imagine you were planting a church and great financials. Let's say 150 active members, something like that.
Yeah.
Like what would be like your first tier, second tier, third tier? Like how would you structure this in order to properly get the gospel out to the, you know, do this gospel proclamation?
Yeah. So one of the things that I liked at my congregation as Redeemer in Oakmont, Pennsylvania, is that they asked me theological questions, and my deacons, my laymen, pray like they know the Bible. Is that the first tier of getting the Word of God out is actually knowing the Word of God. If the congregation doesn't know that, or even more than that, and, you know, let's just be realistic about this, there are pastors who really don't know the Bible that well. They know portions of the Bible. They know Lutheran slogans. Okay. You have the whole Word of God for everything that you need to do in your warfare against Satan. It's not just the slogans. It's not just the stuff you're familiar with. It's not just the first half of Romans. It's the whole thing. So if they don't know that, and the people don't know that, then the Word of God is not going to dwell richly the way Paul prays it would in the congregation. It's going to be, you know, come to church because this is the place where we have the slogans that are familiar to you. And that's going to be fine for a certain number of people. And a certain number of people will, you know, but the problem there is that we then have the same thing that I talked about with Saddleback Church, is that we have a maturity problem, Christian maturity. And that leaves us poorly equipped for the challenges that the church faces internally, uh, conflict, budgets, blah, 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 blah,
Mm-hmm.
but especially externally with our kids going into the world and becoming, like we talked about last time, becoming nothing,
Mm-hmm.
right? But also with the gospel going into the world and not being proclaimed, or when we think we're doing it, we're using the kind of jargon that you talked about earlier that people just don't understand,
Mm-hmm.
because you're launching into some big explanation of how the Missouri Synod is different from the Wells, and here's the Office of Public Ministry, and you ever heard about prayer fellowship? Well, we don't believe in it, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. Who knows what who knows, right?
Yeah.
6 Missouri Synod congregations, 7 different opinions,
Yeah.
right? But
So how would you go about
Yeah.
doing that? Like, let's say first in your style of preaching,
yeah,
what's your goal? Is it do you just do a law gospel kind of plug and play?
yeah, you know me. My job is to convey the word of God
Mm-hmm.
to the people of God.
Mm-hmm.
I see it as a delivery thing. So if the Amazon guy shows up and the box is like pristine and everything is in place, and it was half an hour ahead of what Amazon told me it was going to be delivered, that's a good guy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because he's just handing over what he has there. So, the reason, for instance, that the Lutheran Church has always required its pastors to be educated is because the presumption was you put the work in on Hebrew and Greek, because actually knowing what it says is worth it for the delivery of the word of God.
Mm.
You're not just kind of putzing around with someone else's opinions.
Mm-hmm.
You're not putzing around with whatever the King James translators or the NIV translators or whoever did. You're doing your own stuff and you're handing over what God said.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So in that way, the job is very, very basic. Now, I love it because it's basic, but the deliveries are always, they're always different, because it's different texts, it's different occasions. I'm different, they're different. I come back to the same text and I see something completely distinct in it. So for this, as we record this, it's going to be Pentecost on Sunday. It's going to be a completely different sermon from 6 years ago on the same, with the exact same gospel reading. And on Pentecost, I almost always preach on the John 14 reading. I don't really know why, because otherwise I'm very jumping around.
Yeah.
But is that I'm just delivering it. And there's always so much in there. There's, in terms of application, there's law, and there's gospel, there's doctrine, there's life, there's all kinds of stuff in there. And I just hand it over, and then, I always go back to the warehouse, and there's always more packages to deliver. So there's always more there, but that's, I see it as, it's very simple. I don't think it's a complex job in that way. You're basically just a delivery guy.
And then what else? What else? I mean, obviously, like a Bible study or something like that, right? What other things, or what components of Bible study? Like what else would you do in order to kind of start the process of having these informed and theologically sound leaders and Christians within your church, and then beyond?
I think the preaching and individual Bible study are the real dynamos, because the preaching gets to everybody who's there. And the individual Bible study, the capacity to create Christians who are able to read and understand the Word of God for themselves, that's the real power source. Bible class, which we have not always had, Bible class is wonderful. It is not the be all and end all, for this reason, that it creates a certain kind of an environment that is not directly related to life. It's directly related to itself. And I think part of the reason that pastors who are fresh out of seminary love teaching Bible class in a way that they may not love preaching, or they may not love visiting, or they may not love evangelizing unbelievers, is because it comes directly from the environment they were just in. So it's readily comprehensible. They know exactly what to do. And all of those other things take time, because they relate to life directly, rather than specifically to an academic environment. Whereas the Bible class creates and is a more academic environment. Obviously, the questions are going to be different in a congregation than they are in a seminary classroom, but it's an environment that is extremely familiar to them, right? And I think that every pastor needs to think about what are the things that I find most rewarding about the ministry. I mean, on a personal or an emotional level, and then evaluate, are those the things that are actually most upbuilding to the church, because they might not be, right? People are usually extremely edified by when you visit them when they're sick. That may not be your favorite thing to do. Or evangelizing unbelievers might be a lot harder than visiting somebody who's sick, who's like, oh, thanks for coming, Pastor. It's a very warm, immediately appreciative relationship that you have with the person you're visiting from your congregation. It's usually not like that when you are trying to convince somebody that Christianity is not a fairy tale.
Yeah.
So when you are thinking about what you're doing, you have to evaluate for yourself, why do I like this so much, and why do I not like this as much? And does that actually line up? Because you might say, I'm a pastor, I don't do math. I'm essentially the replacement for the treasurer we don't have. Should I keep doing this? Does the word of God say I should keep doing this? No, it does not. Right? So you might not like something you actually probably shouldn't be doing. That's fine. And you might love something that you should be doing, but you have to figure that out, because in yourself, there's always a tendency to drift towards things that you find immediately rewarding and enjoyable. And that may not be what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Let's jump back a little bit to like the macro.
Yeah.
So where do you think the church is at now? Like, is it beginning a down slope? Is it at the bottom of a down slope? Is it where's it at? Like, we've obviously, to your point, we've been kind of losing a battle for 100 years.
Sure.
Are we preparing to lose for another 75 years, or where are we at?
And I don't think about this in demographic terms, like birth rates and stuff like that, because who knows? And it's also not my job to know about birth rates,
demographic winter,
and demographic winter, and I mean, it's my job in as much as it concerns families, and it's my job in as much as knowing about a variety of interesting things is part of my job. But because I also think that takes an approach, and I feel happy saying this. I got 8 kids. You can find other stuff probably in your YouTube recommendations as you watch this, is something of me talking about birth control. So okay, so don't worry about what I'm about to say. But
what we can talk about,
right? Yeah, that's fine.
100%.
Is that this is the idea that somehow Christians, because they have larger families than average, are here to outbreed people who don't, which is kind of a proven sociological fact, is that conservative people, which is going to include Christians who actually go to church in 2024, generally speaking, conservative people have larger families than secular people who are politically almost uniformly leftist in modern America. That's not real. That's not a Christian approach. Something can be true without being specifically the church's business. And what I mean by that is that it's not my job. It's my job to say, Bible says children are a blessing, blah, 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 and so you can go find this other thing on YouTube about biblical theology of human fertility. That's what it's called. And partly I did that because people have all these fertility problems in their lives. So that was my interest pastorally. But you need to teach what the Word of God says about children, for example. You don't need to worry or be triumphant about what is essentially just a political numbers game on some level of you're gonna wash them out. So I'll give you an example within a church context of that. I don't think there are gonna really be any, you could say this in theological terms, but you could certainly say it in political terms. I don't think there are going to be any liberal Missouri Synod Lutherans by a certain point, because there won't be any reason to be. Because it was a function of loyalty to a certain denomination while also trying to change that denomination in key theological and political ways. Those went together, say, in the 1960s before the walkout of Concordia Seminary, St. Louis.
So those people had an agenda.
Yeah.
They thought they could make changes from within.
Yeah.
Those people have all left or
but they also they had a loyalty to being in a church.
Yeah.
If you were that person in modern day California, why would you go to a Missouri Synod? What is that doing for you?
Yeah.
You're just going to hear a lot of things that you vehemently disagree with
Hmm.
all the time, and so why would that, so just sociologically, I think a lot of things happen over which no one particularly has any control, and you shouldn't have children as some sort of like political one-upmanship game.
Hmm.
I mean, children are a gift per se, like in and of themselves. They are a legitimate face-to-face, this is actually worthwhile thing.
Hmm.
There's very little like that in life. So turning your children into some sort of political thing is reprehensible in the
Mm.
highest. I mean, it's like when a politician gets married so that people trust him more.
Mm.
You are profaning something that is beautiful on its own, and you're making it ugly by making it some sort of, I don't know, something you're holding in reserve against your political enemies.
Mm. Mm.
Okay. Because these things have their own momentum. And so demographically, will much of the Mountain West of the United States be Mormon in 50 years? It's an interesting question. Based on birth rates, a lot more of it will be. Yeah. A lot more of it will be, not just Utah. So all of those things are not the direct concern of the church is how the word of God is faring and whether it's being preached. And so in those terms, how is the church doing? I think the church is doing well in as much as it has retained the word of God. In terms of what we talked about last time, that, in my mind, in a time that was demographically healthier, people were eating organic food and it didn't cost much because they had victory gardens.
Hmm.
They had like 3 suits of clothes and they only ate organic because that's all there was.
Yeah.
That was good, but in that time, the churches were struggling mightily over whether the Bible was the word of God.
Mm.
Somewhat strangely, we're not openly fighting about that.
Yeah.
I think there are proxy battles for that, but we're not openly fighting about that. Instead, what the church is fighting about are usually how does the word of God apply to life,
Hmm.
and how does it apply in the family? How does it apply in the state? Right? Whatever Christian nationalism means, that's a battle about how the word of God applies to the relationship between the church and whatever state it happens to find itself in. Right? We're not fighting about is the Bible the word of God. That's kind of been decided.
So do you think there's
On either
some
level.
theological maturity? Like as things have numerically gone down, do you think there's also been some strength and kind of a more of a firm foundation, or maybe even some more
Well,
theological?
there is a solidity we didn't have.
Mm.
Now, what we gave up in return for that was a centrality in American life.
Mm.
Okay, so I think something I rarely see brought into the discussion of is America a Christian nation? Is it not? Was it supposed to be? Was it never supposed to be? Whatever. Is that functionally in the 1950s, the Bible and Christianity are taken as absolutely normal in every facet of American life, even some that it didn't previously have. And God We Trust was not on the currency in 1930. Okay, so, but the people who occupied that central position were a Roman Catholic Church that had normal Latin masses and parochial schools and tons of kids everywhere and lots of nuns to teach those kids for basically peanuts. Okay, so that's gone. There's still a Roman Catholic Church, but those conditions I described, that's gone. Okay, that's the biggest denomination in the United States. The other ones, which compose and still do a majority of American religious life, everything called Protestantism, the biggest parts of those, and this is what it's really hard for evangelicals to understand. It's hard for Missouri Synod Lutherans to remember, and Roman Catholics never understood the difference between any of us to begin with, is that the stuff at the heart of American life was what is now called mainline, or alternatively, but equivalently, liberal Protestantism. Okay? The Episcopal Church mattered. The United Church of Christ mattered. Now it's a legitimate question. Will there be an Episcopalian apart from enormous endowments
Mm-hmm.
and historic landmark buildings? Will there be Episcopalian congregants in 50 years?
Hmm.
I don't know. I think it's a legitimate question, whereas I don't think it's a legitimate question. Will there be Amish? Will there be Mormons? Will there be Orthodox Jews?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because demographically, each of those three groups is doing fine.
Hmm.
Right. As that declined, so what you'll notice is those mainline denominations all capitulated on the question of, is the Bible the Word of God?
Hmm.
They have shrunk enormously in that time and since that time. That's the gap at the center of American religious life.
So that's the part that's dying.
That's the part that's dying. In addition to which, I would say on just a sheer pastoral level, the Catholic Church in the United States is dying. Because I don't see it as a victory if in a previous age, I'll give you an example. The high school, my congregation has a K-12 school.
Okay.
The high school is its own building. The building used to be a Catholic church. Giant sanctuary. Biggest Lutheran sanctuary in the area, for what it's worth. It's not our
And that's
church.
the high school.
That's the high school. Okay. We have a high school in there because there used to be so many kids at this one Catholic parish that just needed confirmation instruction. It wasn't a school. It was a parish with enough classrooms to fit our small-ish Lutheran high school, because they just needed to come to do confirmation, to do CCD, whatever, right?
Yeah. Wow.
First communion classes. There were 4 or 5 others just in that area of that size. So there were maybe 5 Catholic churches and maybe 4 parochial schools.
Mm-hmm.
In the very same area, there's now 1 church and 1 parochial school. So pastorally speaking, our population hasn't gotten enormously, it hasn't gotten smaller, nationwide. It's shifted to the south and to the west. It hasn't gotten smaller, but pastorally, the descendants of those kids who were in those CCD classes or who were at that Presbyterian church or whatever, that ELCA church, they don't go anywhere by and large. And that to me that's the gap, that's the struggle. Those are the people I think most about because they're all here, in addition to all the people who have, since that time when there were those 5 schools, they're new to the United States, and sometimes they're Christian, right? Especially when they come from Latin America. But when they don't come from Latin America or maybe West Africa, they're usually not Christian, and they also have to be evangelized. So there's just an absolutely enormous population, and a growing percentage of the population has no contact, with the gospel, and I don't find that the church. So is the church doing well? Yes, we're not questioning absolutely basic things that undergird just everything that we do. No, I don't think that we are terribly aware of or active on the front of what is your average person who logs onto YouTube look at.
Yeah.
He's got Mr. Beast videos.
Yeah.
He's got whatever. He's got this. He's got that. Is he seeing anything that we're doing? Right? Because we know he's there.
Yeah.
He's not in our building. We know he's there.
Yeah. So what do you think about some of the things going on? So like Russell Brand converting to Christianity, Jordan Peterson's wife converting to Christianity,
But not Jordan Peterson.
So
Yeah. I don't believe in Jungian. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, he's a Jungian.
why isn't Jordan Peterson Christian yet?
Because Jordan Peterson reads the Bible, and you can see this from his stuff on the Bible most clearly. Jordan Peterson reads the Bible like it's a set of myths representing essentially psychological realities. That's why. Okay. So it all fits into this set of what Carl Jung called archetypes, basically patterns for life and thought and dreams that help you understand and reach full individuation. The goal, self-realization, basically becoming who you truly need to be. Okay? And that's why you would go through Jungian psychology is fundamentally more positive in that way than Freudian psychology, which is the stuff that supplies, like when you get like somebody who's supposed to look like a psychiatrist in in a Geico ad, that person is patterned after Sigmund Freud. So a lot of our basic ideas about what psychology or psychiatry are going to be derived from Freud. Jung is originally a kind of co-worker of Freud and departs in this, I think, more positive direction, but it's not Christian.
Yeah.
And it incorporates Christian.
Is it Christian-esque?
No, it incorporates Christian myths and in what it would call myths into what it sees as a deeper pattern of myth predating Christianity.
What does he mean by myth?
Myth, he means a story that may or may not be historically real. In the case, I could say this is when the Battle of Antietam that I referenced earlier occurred on this day in this place. It may or may not be historically real, but it is psychologically real and powerful for human beings to understand themselves. That's what he means. So he's going to say the myth of slaying the Minotaur, or the myth of the rising of a dead god, or whatever. Your classic place to go to understand this better is a book called The Golden Bough by James Frazer. And in English, that's your best place to access. I think Jung is a little hard to understand, but Peterson is a Jungian psychologist. So if you say that you have a problem that I would say in Christian terms you need to repent, what Peterson wants to do is lead you, maybe through Christian stories, maybe through other stories, to understand that's your introversion and extroversion being Jungian ways of understanding human beings. Okay, that's your psyche revealing to you through, say, your dreams that involve coming out into the sun. Okay. Now you're going to understand yourself if you see that you work under fluorescent lights and you feel completely trapped in your life. And you will understand who you are if you start to take control over your life. And I think what is very perceptive and what is very helpful for people about Jordan Peterson is that he begins to give them a sense of control that is basic to Jungian psychology. First, you understand that you actually have control over this process, and if you go through this process, you will attain a life of reality, of significance. I mean, it's always kind of vague because one of the great things about pagan myths is that you can supply the meaning. And he's just incorporating Christianity and especially biblical stories into this bigger pattern of myths that are going to be helpful to people. Okay.
So how does that compare then with, and obviously it does have certainly contrast, right?
Yeah.
But how does that compare with kind of the, like Jerome, Chris, some of these early church fathers, right? That would read, and that's a whole thing, right? If you use the word allegorically, in their context, that doesn't mean not historically, right? But it does mean they do a lot of that, right? Where they kind of draw on these themes, and they can go on and on and on about Cain and Abel and the way that it affects kind of like this kind of archetype of what man versus, so they can play those things out in some ways. So how does that compare to the way that Jordan Peterson's doing this? Because is there at least a little bit of overlap?
Yeah, there's overlap, and that's why people find Peterson so helpful, because it's not like nothing he's saying is true, and it's just all garbage and just throw it all away.
Yeah.
What the church fathers are doing, allegorically with biblical texts particularly, is that they're trying to provide some level of spiritual significance to stories that appear to be simply historical, like just events that don't directly relate to you. So another, just returning to the same example, if you said, well, my ancestors weren't even in the United States at the time of the Battle of Antietam. So that's an interesting historical event, but that's all it is to me, right? The fathers are trying to take the scriptures out of being just an interesting historical event and apply it to people. And they're doing that largely through allegory.
So the Jews, defeated
the Ammonites. Yeah.
Good for them.
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. And and a lot of people stay locked there in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Or they get bogged down there, or they never even get there because they get bogged down in like numbers when they're trying to read through the Bible. And the reason they do that is because, and this has to do with the partiality of listening. I think it's a big ask to have somebody read the whole Bible, or even where they say, I can't read, I don't have time. I'm like, well, you drive around your work truck all the time, so why don't you listen to the Bible? Whatever, right? That's a big ask because it's asking you to not be self-centered. Being self-centered comes naturally. Being interested in someone else's history, in another place, in another time, in other people that do relate to you through the Savior, but it's not like the Bible is about you,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was
So that would be a key difference with Peterson and like the church fathers. Yeah.
Yeah, the Bible is not about you, but what the fathers were trying to do, and it is commendable. I don't think it's always successful. It's certainly not successful in actually explaining what the Bible means. Is that if the Jews defeat the Ammonites, for example, in a war, the Israelites, that applies to the people of God because it means that what God says will come to pass. Okay. That applies to the people of God because it means that he will use them for purposes that he shows them beforehand. It applies to the people of God because the works that are prepared for them do not have to do with self-aggrandizement. Now, the Israelites will misuse their success against other peoples for self-aggrandizement. They'll say, we were never enslaved to anyone. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But they are, in terms of the Ammonites, they are God's instruments of his wrath worked out on idolatrous nations. That's what they are. It's not some sort of just random, like, God hates these 7 tribes or nations, I guess it would be in that case. They're idolaters, right? That's why they start that particular story in the common ancestor of those nations all the way back in the Noah story with Canaan, right? It's not Ham who is cursed. It's Canaan directly,
who is Ham's son, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Right. The story centers around the evils of Canaan, like much of the rest of Genesis does. So Ham has a certain destiny relative to his brothers because of the incident with Noah after the flood. And that's a problem. But the curse sort of like runs through Canaan and then comes to full flower in the Israelites being a punishment upon those other nations. If you can't read that and you're like, well, this doesn't have anything to do with me. Well, yeah, it does. It just turns out that you're in a nation, you have a history, you are not, you don't exist alone because this has nothing to do with whether one Ammonite is a nice guy and another Ammonite is not a nice guy. All of that does have to do with you, but you can't see it because you're looking at everything in a kind of a self-centered way. Like, what does this have to do with me? And sometimes the fathers will allegorize in order just to skip. Now, modern pastors do this too. They use, we use psychology. They use allegory and myth to skip out of the Bible directly into the person's life. And it's a skip that it just goes too quickly. And it makes the person think that everything is readily comprehensible to him in terms that he already gets. So for modern Americans, that's psychology.
Okay, yeah.
The girl on the plane next to me on the way here was writing a document the entire flight, which was like an hour and 45 minutes from Pittsburgh, called Figuring Out My Feelings. Okay? That's what she was working on.
Yeah.
If she were an ancient Roman or Greek person, she would be thinking in terms of myths, right? So I see Jordan Peterson is very similar to something that sort of has some resemblance to Christianity or answers some of the same spiritual or psychological needs that Christianity does. In the ancient world, those are the mystery cults. It's personalized religion in terms immediately comprehensible to your average person. And that's why it was so popular. So people would go to these places and there's an impressive ceremony and they learn all this stuff about themselves and these ancient mysteries and these myths that they're now directly connected to through this initiation, right? You might think of sort of like a Masonic ceremony is somewhat similar. But it's doing the same thing that Jordan Peterson is doing, which is it's providing an explanation of why someone's life matters or what it's about or how to take control of it in a way that doesn't actually challenge them to repentance, strictly speaking, or doesn't directly engage with the Bible story, which centers on the death and resurrection of Jesus. It's, you can have a significant life, you can have a meaningful life, you can have a good life that involves these tweaks to that life in terms that you already know,
Mhm.
which is psychology for us and myth for them back then.
Let's tease that out a little bit because that's interesting. So I'm thinking, what maybe two sides of this question.
Yeah.
One would just be a little bit historical, kind of,
Okay.
this is what the weather is.
Yeah.
In that this trend of, and maybe it's not a trend, maybe it's always been there, right? But this aspect of kind of the purpose of Christianity, and even in some ways, the Sunday service is supposed to do this, right? Where like it's supposed to kind of pull you out of your life and into the divine activity, right? So
Yeah.
it's supposed to be other oriented and just kind of pull you into something else and kind of almost make you forget yourself.
Yeah.
I remember I heard a sermon somewhere called, it was just something like your life is not about you. And that was just kind of the point. Like it's supposed to draw you out. Like pride and envy and all of these kind of deadly sins are what draws you into yourself.
Yeah.
We seem to be certainly obsessed with that, right? Like she was not the only person writing.
No. No,
writing
other
for it out.
people were figuring out their
That's what
feelings.
everyone was doing. You were
She
the
was
only
just-
person watching everyone else.
I was,
Everyone else was
I love it
Yeah.
because you see such a, it's always a slice of life. I mean, it's easily the most interesting thing about travel if you're not traveling like to see Glacier National Park.
Yeah.
If you're traveling and you just whatever, I'm going to fly from Minneapolis to St. Louis for a meeting after this, I can look at Iowa, I guess, from above, but human beings are endlessly fascinating, and they're not nearly as different from each other as they generally imagine that they are, or that like on this flight, there's all kinds of different people, and there's exchange students from Malaysia wearing hijabs, and there are every different color, every different age. Probably a lot of them are trying to figure out their feelings.
Yeah.
Even the lady from Malaysia, right? Because she's probably sufficiently westernized going to school in America. She thinks her feelings are the most important thing in her life.
So is that a Western thing right now?
It's definitely a modern
Western.
Definitely a modern Western thing. Yeah. If you were going to talk about the history of emotions, which people do, if you're going to talk about the history of emotions, not any specific emotion, but the importance of emotion is so enormous in the modern West. And I think maybe particularly in America, that the way that people feel. And to me, that is something like the weather. I mean, I don't respond to this by saying emotion is unimportant. I hate emotion. Just put it away. But that, for instance, the experience of the church service, right, being other directed, is that the emotions are not keyed to reinforce by what I'm doing, whether it's the liturgy, whether it's the preaching, whatever, that the emotions are not keyed to just reinforce stuff that they do anyway, that the world could provide them with. Okay. That the emotions that are created or reinforced or stirred up freshly or like tamped down. Because if I preach a sermon about anger, for example, most people are going to associate that not just with all the things that the Bible talks about, like the ramifications for your the people affected by your anger or how your anger is expressed. They're basic. When I say anger, people are going to think about the emotion of anger, not the effects or how it relates to the fifth commandment generally or anything like that, right? So emotion is so big that we associate almost everything with an emotion, even when it doesn't have one. Or we get nervous when certain terms are used, right? Because our life is primarily and intensely emotional. If I know that about people, or if I know that about maybe the majority of people I'm talking to or who are going to be in the service, I can't ignore emotion, but I need to associate their emotion with God's grace, or associate their emotion with their memory through, that's the primary function of the liturgy, is that it reinforces memory, right? And it puts emotion into memory. There was a guy that I was talking to, and he said, I want my grandkids to have some sense of church the way that I had it. So this is the emotion of nostalgia. Again, this is just the weather. I mean, I'm not, the guy's like 67 years old. He's thinking about death, and he's thinking about who's going to be here when he's dead. And he specifically mentioned a combination that his small church in rural Minnesota growing up had, which was the simultaneous smell of the candles being put out and the coffee being slightly burnt downstairs. He can smell them at the same time from the back of the sanctuary. he wants his grandkids to have something like that. That's a powerful emotion, especially when emotion is associated with family and love and death, right? So I just engage that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't push that aside and say, well, don't be a modern American.
Right.
Because to me, that is the same problem that the Jews have in Acts 15, the Jewish Christians, with the non-Jewish Christian, which is to say, they are asking you to become something you're never going to be before you can be a Christian. And Paul says, I became as a Jew to the Jews, and I became as a Greek to the Greeks. So to the modern Americans, I'm not going to, I can't just, suck the emotionality out of them first. But it does have to be trained differently to grow productively like a vine. But I can't just ignore it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the emotions, what was I had a thought when you were talking. So the emotions seem to kind of dictate everything else that we do.
Yeah.
Right. So is part of the flip that Christianity is supposed to do is to kind of align the emotions with right action. So maybe I can give just an example because this is something I've been wrestling with. So, we just went through the book of Exodus.
Yeah.
Right. So I was going through some of like the small laws and stuff. And one of the things that stands out, right, is that it seems like as God's giving his laws over to the Israelites, like his concern is, what do you do? Like there's not a lot of laws of like, and you must have this kind of like emotion or whatnot.
Yeah,
So
I know.
so certainly when you get
I
into
know.
like so we had a discussion on like sexual sin, right? Because certainly Jesus does tie in and says, well, anyone who has lust has committed adultery.
right.
That said, like if I go home tonight and my wife's like, hey, I was at the gym and like I lusted after someone, like our evening's not ruined. Like we're just gonna go like, okay, like,
Weird thing to say.
Thanks for telling me,
right.
I guess, but like let's go have dinner, right?
Right.
Like so there's a difference between like this kind of emotional kind of thing you can't fully control,
Right.
and then being like, well, now I'm gonna go follow that guy home, right?
Yeah.
So there's certainly this distinction between what I do and our emotions, and it seems like what you do reverses your emotions, right? So if you're someone that struggles with lust and it's manifesting as masturbation, masturbation's the problem. Attack the masturbation, and you'll actually find that lust is probably going to start being minimized because you're not exercising the emotion and letting it play out.
So there's James talks about sin in organic terms, and I think it's always helpful to he talks about desire, and then when it is full grown, and then when it reaches its end. So you have this progression that is organic, like the seed germinating and then the plant growing to full growth and then producing fruit. Is that when you're dealing with a sin in particular, you have to realize that sin is going to latch onto the growth conditions of your soul. And so if you are primed towards emotion, it will swing you violently on the basis of emotion. Just like if it's a sin and you are prone to despise authority, it will be presented to you as an opportunity to despise authority, right? This is like, people are not that different from each other. Part of the reason they think they are is because they don't know enough about each other, but also because they confuse the variety of appearance for a variety of satanic tactics. He doesn't actually have that many different tactics. They manifest differently to different people. Based on, so let's say that you're totally not led by emotion. Well, then what he needs to do is to convince you that it's the smart thing to do, or that it's the rational thing to do. But if most of us in modern America are led by emotion, then in a way we're weaker, or it doesn't take as long to convince us, because we don't have to be convinced that our lust, for example, is justifiable, and here are the rational reasons why our lust is justifiable, right? Like some sort of, 18th century aristocrat who is despising Christianity and has attached himself to the religion of reason, okay, which was deified during the French Revolution in a what had been a Christian church and what now is again a Christian church. He's going to present it as, this is going to be fun, and we don't have to think that much because we don't think.
Yeah.
And that, and that is pretty bad in many ways. But in a way that's just neutral, it's just that we're led by emotion. So, like for an American, it's very powerful if someone is friendly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that guy might be a horrible guy, and he might be, but he's friendly, and he conveys great emotion and presence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important to us, and that's just the way it is. I mean, like you can't go back in time and just change a whole culture so that it's not like that.
Yeah.
You know, any more than you could try to take the gospel to Malaysia and say, okay, pretend Islam doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right. It's just, those are the operating conditions. So when you're thinking about sin, yeah, you usually want to stop the gross manifestation of it first, because that will have an effect kind of going backwards or down from, the tips of the leaves down to the root. That will have an effect. But if you really want to root the thing out, you do have to find where the roots are and get them out and, dig them out. And there will be more. There are always weeds. But if you're working on something specific, you actually do have to get to the place of emotion, because you have to realize, if you're a modern American, that emotion, and particularly I think what you were referencing, the value of sincerity, which is a judgment about emotional appearance, right? Sincerity has to do with tone. It has to do with gesture, has to do with eye contact. Sincerity doesn't have to do with reality necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
We take it as the same thing as reality. Well, he really meant it. And then we even will say, like, well, if he really meant it, then that's good enough for whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that you're sincere, you could be sincerely wrong about anything.
Mm-hmm.
I sincerely believe, absolutely sincerely, I sincerely believe that the earth is flat.
Mm-hmm.
Sincerely, right? Well, that doesn't matter, right? That doesn't have anything to do with Archimedes calculations, or, that doesn't have anything to do with, space flight or any, like, just because you sincerely believe it doesn't matter. There are lots of people on YouTube who sincerely believe that the earth is flat.
Well, what we could do is we could just kind of clip you saying, I sincerely believe the earth is flat.
It. Somebody will,
and
so that's fine.
And at some point, most of the LCMS will sincerely believe that Adam Koontz thinks that the earth is flat.
I know, right, exactly. Yeah, so we take sincerity as a one-to-one proxy for truth, for reality, and it's not. It's a component, or it's a reliable outflow, or when somebody is friendly and making eye contact, we are obviously wired to believe, built to believe, designed to believe that person is a good person, is a sincere person, is a helpful person, is a kind person. We just have to keep in mind that he may not be, because emotion is not the same thing as reality.
Mm-hmm.
And part of Christian maturity is the Word of God retraining the emotions, both to be in their proper place, but also to be fitting to the occasion, to be disgusted by what the Bible is disgusted by, to rejoice at what the Bible rejoices in. And that process is obviously never going to be complete, but that is part of it. That is part of it. If that never happens because emotion is not addressed, or the pastor acts like emotion doesn't exist or whatever, then the emotions will just remain haywire like they were before the person came into contact with the Word of God. Yeah.
Let's take a break.
Yeah.
All right, and we're back. So real quick, just kind of reflecting on this emotion aspect. So if someone's listening to this and they're wondering, okay, I'm Western. I grew up in the U.S. I'm 28 years old, but whatever.
Yeah.
And I recognize that I'm very much emotionally driven, or I'm very much kind of obsessed with this narrative of my own emotions and whatnot. So I'm just I'm normal in this day of age.
Right.
What are things that Christianity offers, or what are things that these individuals can work on in order to kind of maybe curb their emotions or get it in right alignment with kind of Christian thought?
Christianity offers absolute clarity about what is real and what is not. And emotion wanders all over the place and can't tell the difference, which is when people especially just go crazy because they don't know the difference between real and unreal, or what is real they can't handle because they're not really primed to deal with real. They're primed to deal with feels good or feels bad. Christianity is going to provide you with a sense of what is real and what is not real. And it's going to show you what is good, which is to live with God and live with him forever. And it's going to show you what is bad, which is to run all over the place with your emotions, what feels good, what feels bad, because that's not leading anywhere good, either right now in this life or forever, because you're meant to live forever.
Hmm.
That's why everything weighs more and matters more than it even seems to at the time, because your soul is actually built for forever. So once you know what's real and you know what's good, now you can pursue those things. You can live with Christ. You can get baptized, whatever you need to do. But that is why Christianity matters, is because it's actually the truth, and everything else is going to provide some amount and level of deception, and it's going to mess, especially with your emotions, for that reason.
So is that where the idea of like Christian freedom comes in? Like the freedom is the ability to do what you ought to do, so you become kind of free from this tyrannical kind of volatility.
Yeah,
of your
the
emotions?
Christian is free from sin, death, and Satan. He doesn't belong to any of them. When you're just following your own emotions, you belong to all those things at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And you will know what death and hell are somewhat like even before death if you follow your emotions everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
If you know that that's the problem and that's the case, then you can begin to curb your emotions by giving yourself, this is why things like quiet and things like space and things like particularly learning the Word of God change you so radically, because what they do is they kind of scoop out the gunk in your soul
Mm-hmm.
and then wash it. Okay. And if that doesn't happen, then your emotions are just going to stay down there unexamined. And you're just going to think that this is the way life is. Like, life is just me, like, going all over the place. Life is me being crazy. Life is me being unstable. Life is me being incessantly dissatisfied. Doesn't have to be that way, but you need to let the Word of God rinse all that out,
Mm-hmm.
disinfect, shine some light on it. And that will change you in ways that are going to be unpredictable to you, but good for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of was it C.S. Lewis who says, hell starts as a grumble, or a grumbling mood.
Yeah.
But eventually, like if the trajectory goes long enough, that
Right.
grumbling mood that was at,
Yeah.
just you'd kind of see it and like, at 30, by the time you're 80, it can actually be pretty tyrannical.
Yeah.
But if you
Yeah.
live to 600, like
Yeah.
at some point, that
Right.
trajectory of eternity is going to make those kind of small, dislocated, emotions or actions. And it is going to become actually hell itself.
Hell is a kind of perfection of evil.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
People that are evil in specific ways. I used to think it was sort of an exaggeration when Dante takes us and Virgil takes him on a tour of hell in his poem from the Middle Ages. I used to think it was kind of it's kind of like over the top, like, oh, this guy was gluttonous, so food will be dangled in front of him at all times, or he will be stuffed with food until he literally bursts. Okay, I get it. I understand that's bad. But part of the point there was that pet sins, following your emotions everywhere, whatever, so maybe you would just be like yanked between joy and despair incessantly. If you're a modern American who gets sent to hell, I don't know what your problem would be. You would be yanked between dopamine hits from social media and utter depression as you sit there in your bed after you blacken your phone and put it down, and now you're just like sad because you can't get the dopamine hit until you wake up again, or pick up your phone again because you don't sleep enough. Whatever the case may be, your evil will be perfected in hell. Yeah. And Lewis is very insightful on this because he's got, my favorite Lewis writing is his sermon, The Weight of Glory, which is about how you look at other people based on the fact that they are immortal souls meant to live forever, either in blessedness or in damnation, in heaven or in hell. And if you think about them that way, then you just look at people differently. You just look at your interactions differently. It's part of that kind of perspective change that I talked about a little bit earlier, is that you look at them as people actually in need of the eternal gospel, the everlasting gospel, because they're actually meant to live forever. And if they don't get that, then evil will simply find its full fruition. The flower of evil will grow until it blooms in hell. And you don't want that. You don't want to see those flowers. Yeah.
It makes you take people more seriously.
Totally.
Right. If someone's just kind of a, bad actor, a little bit grumpy, and you're like, well, he's going to die in 20 years anyway, and that's just kind of the end of it. Like, you don't take that issue so seriously. But if you look at him as eternal, then it's like, well, that's a serious issue that has an eternal kind of perpetuation.
I think the gospel is meant to have you take other people seriously as the object of God's eternal love in Christ Jesus. So when you look at them through the blood, then that changes your perspective on them.
Hmm.
You know, you just do not think of them the same way, because they're not just somebody that you're buying something from, or they're not just somebody that you work with. If you look at yourself through the gospel, then it should make you take yourself very unseriously. I
Mhm.
mean, and just not to be impressed with yourself, because the person you know best is somebody who you know for sure doesn't deserve God's love. Now, the thing is, in our sinful nature, we think of other people as undeserving and ourselves as generally deserving.
Mhm.
And we're dismayed and confused when we don't. I mean, very, 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 very few human beings lose any sleep at night over the fact that something inexplicably horrible is happening to someone else.
Mm.
If they do, it's because that person is probably their family member. That's comes naturally. We always lose sleep, not just over inexplicably horrible things, but about slights and bad performance reviews that happen to us.
Hmm.
We're not, because we assume that we deserve, and we generally assume that others, if they do, they don't to the same degree that we do,
Mhm.
and they probably don't
Mhm.
deserve. So the gospel helps me take them much more seriously as those for whom Christ shed his precious blood. It makes me take myself I'm not impressed with myself. I'm not serious about myself. I'm not very, very interested in myself. You want me to talk about myself. It's not that easy. I don't find that interesting,
Mhm.
because I know the whole story on this end.
Mhm.
And it's just, it's really only amazing from God's side.
Mhm.
It's not from mine.
Yeah.
It's only deserving from his side. It's not from mine. It's only loving from his side. It's not from mine. So it should make you take yourself much less seriously, including your own sincerity, because the fact that you meant it, if you have an ounce of experience that you've reflected on at all, shouldn't matter a whole lot, because yeah, you meant it, but it was still stupid.
Yeah.
Or you meant it, but it's still sinful.
Yeah.
You know, whatever. So the fact that you meant it doesn't matter that much.
Yeah. Yeah. So the gospel certainly just, it makes you look up and out and not in.
Yeah.
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 And maybe the most, when you're looking in, it's mostly to see, I'm spending too much time looking in.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
what that's.
Yeah.
You're
I mean,
looking and reflecting and saying, start looking back out.
Yeah. What's down there? What are you going to find?
Yeah.
I mean, is it really that great? Is there buried treasure down there? I don't think so. You know, I think it's just rocks all the way down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, thank you
Yeah.
for coming on the show again.
My pleasure.
This is always a blast.
Yeah.
And just a reminder for all of our listeners, B-Hop, Brief History of Power.
Brief History of Power.
What other things are you involved in that you would want to direct people towards?
Redeemer Lutheran Church and School, Oakmont, Pennsylvania.
Oakmont, Pennsylvania. You can move there.
Uh-huh.
There's electrician jobs available.
I mean, you can
There's-
move there if you want to. I mean, it's, you know, it's Pittsburgh, so, you know, things are not expensive, but you don't, I mean, if you move there and you don't like the Steelers, you might as well not move there. So,
Yeah.
you know, I don't need to recruit you, but, you know, yeah, it's wonderful.
Hey, well, thanks for all you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers.